The autumn wind sent a scattering of dry leaves skittering across the polished stone plaza of Seoul National University of Advanced Sciences. Students hurried between the sleek glass and steel buildings, a river of backpacks and casual chatter. The day was ordinary until she arrived. The first thing anyone noticed was the sound. A heavy, solid clunk thud. Clunk thud cut through the light sounds of campus. It was the sound of serious weight being moved with purpose. Heads turned. Park Yuna walked onto campus as if she belonged there, which her transfer papers said she did. She was not overly tall, but she seemed broad, substantial. This impression came from the suit of armor she wore. It was full plate, covering her from neck to boots. It was not ornate or medieval. It was smooth, matte gray, and looked strangely modern, like a piece of industrial equipment. A helmet was tucked under one arm, revealing her face. Her face was calm, a mask of neutral focus. She had dark eyes that scanned her surroundings, not with nervousness, but with a quiet, automatic assessment. Her black hair was cut in a simple, practical style. She looked to be about 22, but her eyes seemed much older. Whispers broke out immediately. A few students laughed, pointing with their phones. "Is this a joke?" muttered Kim Tae-hyun from his spot on the library steps. He was a senior, a sharp-minded xenobiology student who had little patience for what he saw as distractions. Next to him, his friend Lee Ji-hoon just watched, his engineering mind curious about the armor's joint mechanics. "Maybe she's from one of those live-action role-playing clubs?" Ji-hoon offered. On the first day of the semester, in the middle of campus, Tae-hyun shook his head. "It's a cry for attention. A loud, metallic one." Yuna ignored them all. She moved with a steady, deliberate pace towards the main administration building. The heavy steps of her armor were a constant, unfamiliar rhythm. People moved out of her way, not because she was aggressive, but because she carried an invisible space around her, a bubble of quiet intensity. Inside the bright administration office, the air-conditioned hum fell silent. A clerk, Ms. Bay, looked up from her computer and her smile froze. Yuna placed her documents on the counter with a soft tap. "I am Park Yuna. I am here to complete my transfer registration," Yuna said. Her voice was low, clear, and devoid of any noticeable emotion. Bay blinked. "Right? Yes, of course." She fumbled with the papers. They were perfectly in order. Name, age, previous credits. But the listed prior institution was just a code, and the file was unusually thin. Ms. Bay's computer screen flashed a brief, bright green notification, a security clearance marker she'd only seen once before, during a government audit. She wisely did not comment. "Your student ID," Ms. Bay said, handing over a card. "Your dorm assignment is in the Hibiscus Hall. Do you need help with your luggage?" Yuna almost smiled. It was a tiny, faint movement at the corner of her mouth. "No. Thank you. I have everything I need." What she had, apparently, was just the armor she stood in and a small, plain backpack slung over one shoulder. She turned and left the office, the clunk thud echoing in the tiled hallway. The rest of the day, Yuna was a ghost of gray metal moving through the streams of colorful jackets and backpacks. She attended her first class, a lecture on mineralogy. She sat in the very back row, her armor settling into the seat with a deep sigh of mechanics. She did not speak. She took notes on an old-fashioned paper notebook, her gloved hand moving with efficient precision. The professor paused, staring at her for a long moment before continuing. After class, the rumors began to fly. In the cafeteria, it was all anyone could talk about. "I heard she's a millionaire's daughter and it's some kind of high-tech fashion," said one student. "I think she's just mentally ill," said another, not unkindly but with certainty. "Severe social anxiety. The armor is a security blanket." Yoonji, a psychology graduate student, listened to these theories. She had seen Yuna in the mineralogy class. The armor was startling, but Yoonji was trained to look at eyes, at posture. The woman inside the metal did not seem afraid. She seemed detached, resigned, perhaps. Yoonji made a mental note to find a gentle way to introduce herself later as dusk painted the sky orange. Yuna finally went to her dorm room. It was a single, standard issue. She stepped inside, closed the door, and for the first time since arriving, the audible weight of her steps ceased. She stood perfectly still in the center of the small, empty room. Slowly, she raised her right arm and looked at the seamless gray plating covering her hand. Her expression in the quiet solitude was unreadable. There was no relief at being alone, no sadness. It was the face of someone carrying a burden so familiar it had become a part of them. Outside, the sounds of a normal university evening carried on. Laughter from a nearby window, the distant thump of music, a group of friends calling to each other. They were sounds from a world that felt very far away from the silent figure in the gray room. Yuna placed her helmet on the bare desk. It sat there, a stark, foreign object in the plain domestic space. She did not remove any more of the armor. She simply sat down on the edge of the bed, the frame creaking under the extraordinary weight, and waited for the first day to be truly over. The initial shock of Yuna's arrival settled into a constant background buzz. She was no longer a single day's spectacle. She was a fact of campus life, a strange and silent monument that moved between classes. The polished gray armor became a familiar sight, but no less strange. Kim Taehyun found himself irritated by her. His mind was a precise instrument, focused on the tangible truths of biology and chemistry. This theatrical display offended his sense of order. He saw her in the library, sitting motionless at a terminal, the light from the screen reflecting off her chest plate. Why does she have to wear it everywhere? He muttered to Lee Ji-hoon as they walked to their advanced physics lecture. The cafeteria, the library. It's ridiculous. Does she sleep in it? Ji-hoon, ever practical, shrugged. Maybe it's structural, or medical. Could be an external skeleton for a spinal injury. It moves too smoothly for just costume armor. That's not the point, Taehyun said, though Ji-hoon's engineering observation stuck in his head. It's a disruption. People are treating her like a walking mystery instead of a student. Look. They passed a group of first-years who were openly staring and giggling as Yuna walked by on the other side of the path. She gave no sign she noticed them. The theories among the student body grew more elaborate. The popular one was that she was an ultra-rich heiress from a secretive family, testing some new personal defense technology. Another was that she was a famous online gamer, living in a self-created character. The kinder, quieter theory, championed by many in the psychology department after speaking with Choi Yoonji, was one of profound trauma. The armor was a shield, a necessary barrier between a wounded young woman and the world. Yoonji believed this last one might be closest to the truth. She made an effort. In their shared seminar on cognitive patterns, she deliberately took the seat next to Yuna one afternoon. The professor's references are a bit dense, aren't they? Yoonji said lightly, offering a small smile as she opened her notebook. Yuna turned her head. The movement was smooth but slow, as if the armor required conscious effort. Her dark eyes met Yoonji's. There was no warmth there, but no hostility either. It was like looking into the eyes of a soldier on guard duty. Yes, Yuna replied simply. Her voice was a low hum, barely louder than the quiet rustle of her armor as she shifted. Did you find the reading on neural mapping interesting? Yoonji pressed gently. It was familiar, Yuna said after a pause. Then she turned her gaze back to the front of the room, effectively ending the conversation. It was a polite but firm dismissal. Yoonji felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The word familiar echoed. How could such an advanced paper be familiar to a transfer student in an introductory seminar? Taehyun's curiosity, fueled by annoyance, took a more direct path. He had a friend in the registrar's office. Over coffee, he casually asked about the unusual transfer, Park Yuna. His friend's usual cheerful face went flat. Don't, Taehyun. Seriously, I looked once. Her file is tagged. Federal security layer. Not just private, but restricted view, national interest. I got an automated warning just clicking on it. The coffee tasted suddenly bitter. A federal security flag on a university student? For Taehyun, the puzzle stopped being a silly distraction and became a real problem. What was she hiding? Meanwhile, Yuna followed a rigid, solitary routine. Classes, the library, her dorm. But late at night, when the campus gym was nearly empty, she would appear. The night custodian, an old man named Mr. Park, grew used to her. He saw her enter the weight room and go not to the modern, digital machines, but to the old, dusty corner with the free weights and simple, heavy benches. He watched, hidden by the hallway shadow. One night, he saw her lift, not with the loud grunts of the athletes, but with a terrifying, silent efficiency. She loaded a bar with weights that seemed impossible. The plates were so heavy the bar bowed. Then, without any visible strain, she performed a perfect military press, lifting the colossal weight overhead as if it were made of air. The metal of her armor did not strain. It simply functioned. The only sound was the deep, resonant clink of the weights. Mr. Park stopped watching after that. Some things, he felt, were not meant to be seen. Yuna's secret late-night training was the final piece for Taehyun. Jaehoon, convinced by the custodian's second-hand account, helped him plan. If it's advanced tech, Jaehoon reasoned, the material composition will be off the charts. We can use the spectrometry scanner from the materials lab after hours. Just get a close reading. Their chance came a few days later. Yuna was sitting on a stone bench in a quiet courtyard, perfectly still, almost like a statue in the afternoon sun. Taehyun and Jaehoon walked by, their scanner hidden in a backpack. Jaehoon pretended to trip, stumbling close to her. He fumbled with the bag, aiming the scanner's concealed lens at her armored shoulder for a brief 3-second burst. They hurried away, hearts pounding. Back in Jaehoon's lab, they pulled up the data. The readout scrolled, analyzing the elemental makeup of the gray armor. The screen flashed with red warning markers. The primary composition was a titanium alloy, but laced with elements the database could only label with provisional, classified designations. Composite Thate-9 and dense matter weave. This is aerospace grade. No, beyond that, Jaehoon whispered, his face pale. This is theoretical stuff. The kind they write papers about needing a decade to develop. Taehyun stared at the screen. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a cold, sinking realization. Park Yuna was not a performance artist or a traumatized rich girl. She was something else entirely. The armor was not a costume or a crutch. It was a tool, a weapon perhaps, and she was sitting in the middle of their university, and no one knew why. The campus felt different after Taehyun overheard that conversation. The autumn air seemed colder, sharper. The normal sounds of student life felt like a thin cover over something much quieter and more serious. Yuna became a ghost again, but now she was a ghost everyone was afraid of. Choi Yoonji noticed the change in Yuna first. The calm, detached expression was gone. It was replaced by a deep, silent anxiety. Yuna moved like someone waiting for a trap to spring. The crack on her chest was a constant worry. She would press her palm over it sometimes, as if feeling for a heartbeat. Yoonji could not stand it. She believed in facing pain, not hiding from it. One evening, she saw Yuna sitting alone by the large, man-made pond on the south side of campus. The water was still, reflecting the gray sky. Yuna was just a dark shape on the bench. Yoonji walked over and sat down next to her. She did not say anything at first. They both watched the water. The usual sounds of Yuna's armor were very quiet, just a soft, almost mechanical hum. I'm not here to ask questions, Yoonji said finally, her voice gentle. I'm here because it looks like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And that's a lonely thing to do. Yuna did not move for a long time. Then, a single, quiet sound escaped her. It was not quite a sigh. It was the sound of a lock beginning to turn. Her shoulders, usually so rigid, slumped just a little. They call me a veteran, Yuna said, her voice so low it was almost lost in the breeze. But veterans come home. Never really left. Yoonji stayed silent, just listening. The armor, Yuna continued, staring at her own gray hands. It's not what you think. It's not what anyone thinks. She turned her head to look at Yoonji. Her eyes were full of a sadness so old it had worn itself smooth. Do you want to see? The secret under the plate. Yoonji nodded, her heart beating fast. Only if you want to show me. Yuna looked around. The area was empty. She lifted her right arm. On the inside of her wrist, where a watch might go, was a small, seamless panel. She pressed a specific sequence with her other hand. There was no sound, but the panel glowed a soft white. Then, it began. The movement was silent and horrifyingly organic. The gray plate on her chest did not open like a door. It retracted. It flowed inwards, folding and shrinking, the material seeming to dissolve into itself. It moved across her body, from her chest down her arms, up her neck, retreating like a living metal skin. It did not reveal a suit underneath. It revealed her a simple, gray university t-shirt and sweatpants, and skin. But the skin was wrong. It was covered in a network of fine, silvery lines. They looked like delicate scars or circuits, etched directly into her flesh. They pulsed with a very dim, slow light, a pale blue that matched the light from the crack. The lines ran up her neck, down her arms, vanishing under her clothes. At the center of her chest, where the crack had been, was a denser patch of these lines, forming a complex, circular pattern that looked like a welded scar. The armor was now just a thick band around her waist and a collar around her neck, like the base layer of a system. I am not wearing it, Yuna said, her voice trembling for the first time. It's grafted, to my bones, to my nerves. It's part of me, the Aegis program. Yoonji could not speak. She could only stare at the living map of sacrifice etched into the young woman's body. When I was 19, Yuna said, looking back at the pond, they asked for volunteers. They said it was for planetary defense. A last stand. They didn't say it was permanent. A single tear traced a clean line down her cheek, avoiding the silvery scars. 300 of us. They called us pilots. We weren't pilots. We were the frame, the human core of a single-use weapon system. They sent us to the edge of everything, to a place they called the Silent Front. It wasn't a war anyone could see. It was a holding action, against things that wanted to come in. She closed her eyes. One by one, the others burned out. Their systems failed. Their minds collapsed. The energy was too much. I was just good at holding on. The last one. I held a point in nothingness for 3 days until it closed. When it was over, I was the only one left. The only one who came back. She opened her eyes, and the full weight of her loneliness was in them. They gave me medals no one can see, and they let me go. But this, she gestured to the scars, to the band around her waist, this doesn't come off. I am the suit. The secret under the plate is that there is no under anymore. I am the memorial for 300 people no one knows died. And all I wanted was to sit in a classroom and learn about rocks, and pretend, for a little while, that I was normal. Yoonji reached out slowly. She did not touch the scars. She placed her hand over Yuna's own, which was trembling. The skin of Yuna's hand was warm, human, but threaded with those faint silver lines. Thank you, Yoonji whispered, her own eyes full of tears, for telling me, and for holding the line. Yuna nodded, a sharp, painful movement. She pressed the sequence on her wrist again. The gray material flowed back out, covering the evidence, sealing the silent war away under a shell of smooth, unbroken plate. The girl vanished, and the statue returned. But for Yoonji, the world had changed completely. The mystery was solved, and the answer was infinitely sadder and braver than any rumor could ever be. She walked back to her dorm in the dark, holding the truth inside her, a truth that felt as heavy as metal. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. The hairline crack on Yuna's chest plate became the only thing anyone could see. It was a tiny fault line in the mystery that surrounded her. The faint blue light had faded after an hour, but the physical crack remained, a stark reminder that the gray shell was not invincible. The story of the rescue spread across campus like a wildfire, but the mood was different now. The laughter and mockery were gone, replaced by a hushed, fearful respect. People gave her even more space. She was no longer a curious oddity. She was something powerful and unknown. Kim Tae-hyun could not let it go. The spectacle of strength was one thing, but the crack and the light, that was data. It was a flaw in the system, a chance to understand. He spent hours in the library, not on his own studies, but searching military databases, aerospace patents, and fringe science forums. The terms from the spectrometry scan, composite Theta-9, dense matter weave, led him down dark digital rabbit holes. He found buried references in declassified reports about energetic diffusion and dimensional stress fractures. His research kept circling back to one recurring phrase in the most shadowy, theoretical discussions. The silent front. He had no idea what it meant. But the words felt cold and heavy. Yuna's routine changed slightly. She still went to classes, but she moved with a new wariness. The crack seemed to bother her. She would sometimes look down at it, her gloved fingers tracing the line briefly, a small frown on her face. In their psychology seminar, Choi Yoonji tried to catch her eye, to offer a smile of support, but Yuna's gaze was distant, locked on some internal problem. A few days after the incident, Yuna received a formal summons via her student portal. It was not from a professor, but from the office of Professor Kwon, the head of military history and theoretical Xenostudies. Kwon was a legend on campus, a stern, older man who had supposedly advised the National Security Council and who taught classes so secretive they required separate clearance. Yuna went to his office that afternoon. It was a quiet, wood-paneled room at the top of an old building, filled with books and models of historical spacecraft. Professor Kwon did not look up from his desk when she entered. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. "Close the door fully, Mississippi Park," he said, his voice like dry gravel. She did. The clunk of her armor was loud in the quiet room. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were sharp and missed nothing. They went directly to the crack on her chest. He did not seem surprised. "Sloppy," he stated. Yuna said nothing. She stood at attention, her hands at her sides. "A civilian incident," Kwon continued, standing up slowly. "A scaffolding collapse. And you reveal operational capability for that. You drew a beacon on yourself. Every intelligence agency on campus and several off it will have their eyes on that fracture. The alternative was letting them die." "Sir?" Yuna said, her voice flat, formal. "The alternative was not being here at all," Kwon countered, walking around his desk. He stopped in front of her, looking up at her impassive face. "I argued against this. A veteran of the Silent Front does not get to go to college. You are a strategic asset, one that is now damaged." The term hit the air like a stone. Veteran of the Silent Front. It was the phrase from Tae-hyun's research. "The integrity is compromised, but functional," Yuna replied. "The core is stable. It was a superficial layer." "Do not lecture me on your own systems, girl," Kwon said, but his anger seemed tired. "I know what the Aegis entails, and I know the cost." He looked old suddenly. "Your presence is a risk. Your damaged presence is a greater one. You must report for a full diagnostic. Immediately. This student experiment may be over." Outside the door, Kim Tae-hyun's blood ran cold. He had followed Yuna, driven by an obsession he could no longer control. The old building had thin walls and air vents that carried sound. He had heard every word. Veteran of the Silent Front. Aegis. Strategic asset. Damaged. The words swirled in his head, forming a terrifying picture. This was not about a person with advanced tech. This was about a soldier. A soldier from a war no one knew about. "With respect, Professor." Yuna's voice came through the door, firm and clear. "My tour was completed. My service was discharged. The agreement was for reintegration, a normal life. This," she said, and he imagined her gesturing to the crack, "does not change that agreement. I will submit to a diagnostic. But I am not leaving." There was a long silence. Then Professor Kwon's voice, lower now. "You carry the front with you, child. You cannot just take it off. They will not let you." Tae-hyun heard footsteps. He scrambled back from the door and around a corner, his heart hammering against his ribs. The office door opened, and Yuna walked out. She paused for a moment in the hallway, her head bowed. She looked, for the first time Taehyun had ever seen, truly young. And truly tired. She walked away, the sound of her steps echoing in the empty hall. Taehyun waited until she was gone. Then he ran. He found Lee Ji-hoon in the engineering lab and pulled him into a storage closet. "You were right," Taehyun breathed, his eyes wide. "It's not a suit. She's not wearing it. She is it. She's a veteran of something called the Silent Front. They called her an asset. And she's damaged." Ji-hoon stared at him. The reality of it, spoken aloud, was too big for the small closet. The playful mystery had vanished. They were no longer students investigating a curiosity. They had stumbled into something deep and dark and official. "What do we do?" Ji-hoon whispered. Taehyun thought of the crack, the blue light, the impossible strength. He thought of the fear in Professor Kwan's voice, a man who was never afraid. "We find out what the Silent Front really is," he said, "before whatever she's holding back finds its way out." The campus festival was meant to be a break from the seriousness of study. The central plaza was transformed. Strings of lights hung between trees. There were booths for food, games, and student clubs. Music filled the air, and for a few hours, the mystery of the girl in armor was set aside. She was just another odd part of the scenery. Yuna stood at the edge of the crowd, a silent gray sentinel. She watched the laughing students, the couples holding hands, the groups dancing badly. Her face, as always, was unreadable. Choi Yoonji, standing with some friends, saw her and felt a pang of sadness. Yuna looked profoundly separate, an observer from behind an invisible wall. Kim Taehyun was there too, but his mind was not on the festival. It was on the spectrometry data. He watched Yuna, no longer with irritation, but with a sharp, scientific hunger. What was she? The incident began without warning. The physics club had a demonstration booth with plasma orbs and a small Tesla coil. Something went wrong. There was a sharp pop, a smell of ozone, and then a flash of electrical fire as a power line to their main display shorted. Flames, bright and sudden, licked up the side of their temporary scaffold, which held speakers and lights. Panic is a quiet thing at first. A gasp, then a scream, then chaos. The fire spread quickly, fed by cables and decorative fabric. The crowd surged back, a wave of bodies tripping over each other. The physics club members scrambled away. But in the rush, a group of first-year students, trapped against a now-hot food cart, screamed for help. Above them, the main structure of the scaffold, a lattice of metal pipes, groaned. One of its support legs, weakened by the heat, buckled with a terrible metallic shriek. Time seemed to slow. The heavy framework, at least 2 tons of metal and equipment, tipped. It was falling directly toward the trapped students. Security guards were too far away, fighting through the fleeing crowd. People froze, watching the inevitable crash. Yuna moved. It was not a run. It was a launch. One moment she was at the edge of the plaza. The next, she was a gray streak, a blur of motion that seemed to tear through the space between. The sound of her movement was new, a deep, powerful thrum of energy, not the usual clunk of steps. She did not try to catch the falling structure. She placed herself between it and the students. As it fell, she turned her body and braced. Her feet planted on the paved ground with a crack that split the stone. Her arms came up, not to catch, but to guide. The collapsing scaffold slammed onto her shoulders and back. The impact was a deafening crash of bending metal. The sound echoed over the suddenly silent plaza. The music had stopped. The screams had choked off. Yuna did not crumple. She stood, a single pillar holding up a mountain of twisted steel. Her knees were bent, her posture perfect. The servos and actuators in her armor screamed in protest, a high-pitched whine of immense stress that cut through the air. The metal of her own armor groaned under the load, a deep, visceral sound of strain. For a long, terrible minute, nothing happened. Yuna was a statue of gray metal holding up a tomb. Sparks from the electrical fire fell around her. The trapped students, staring up in shock, were frozen. "Move!" The word came from Yuna, but it did not sound like her usual low voice. It was amplified, distorted by strain and perhaps internal systems, a commanding roar that broke the spell. Now! The students scrambled, crawling out from under the shadow of death. Security finally arrived, helping them the last few feet to safety. Only when the area was completely clear did Yuna move again. With another deep, grinding groan of metal, she began to lower the mass. She did not drop it. She controlled its descent, bending at the knees, easing the wreckage down until it settled on the ground with a final, heavy thud. Then she stood up straight. The silence was absolute. Every eye was on her. Smoke drifted around her figure. On her chest plate, a long hairline crack was now visible, running from her right shoulder down towards the center. A faint, very faint, shimmer of pale blue light seeped from the fracture, like liquid energy. Yuna took a deep breath, a sound like a hydraulic piston. She looked at the crack on her own chest, then at the stunned faces around her. Her expression was not one of pain or triumph. It was one of profound tiredness and a hint of frustration. As if a carefully maintained secret had been accidentally revealed, she turned and began to walk away. Her steps were slower now, heavier. The rhythmic clunk thud was accompanied by a new, softer sound. A faint, persistent hum coming from the crack in her armor, and no one tried to stop her. No one cheered. The reality of what they had just witnessed was too big, too impossible, for cheers. A young woman had just stopped several tons of falling metal with her body. Not with luck, not with help, with sheer, impossible strength. Taehyun stood rooted to the spot, his earlier theories shattered. This was not hidden technology for a disability. This was power of an entirely different magnitude. He looked at Jihoon, whose face was white. Jihoon simply pointed a trembling finger at the crack on Yuna's retreating back, at the strange blue light. "That's not armor," Jihoon whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. "That's a containment shell." Yuna walked away from the plaza, away from the lights and the smoke, back towards the quiet darkness of the campus paths. The festival was over. The performance was done. The truth, or a piece of it, was now out in the open, glowing faintly on her cracked chest for all to see. The truth was a stone in Choi Yoonji's stomach. She carried Yuna's secret quietly, her heart aching with the weight of it. She saw the sadness in the girl's eyes now, the immense loneliness behind the calm face. Yoonji offered small gestures, a shared tea in the cafeteria, a silent walk between classes, a quiet companionship that asked for nothing in return. But Kim Taehyun carried the truth differently. For him, it was not a burden of sadness, but a key to a locked door. He had the pieces, the overheard term silent front, the impossible technology, the government secrecy. The story was bigger than one person. It was a hidden chapter of human history, and he believed the world deserved to know. He felt a burning need to expose it. He told Lee Jihoon everything he'd heard from Professor Kwan's office. Jihoon, ever cautious, shook his head. "Taehyun, this isn't a lab experiment. This is her life. And it's dangerous." "That's exactly why," Taehyun argued, his eyes bright with conviction. "If there was a war, if people sacrificed everything, we have a right to know. She's a hero, and she's hiding in plain sight because someone told her to be quiet. That's wrong." He worked for 2 days and nights. He wrote a document. He called it The Silent Front, the ghost soldier of SNUAS. He was careful. He used no real names. He called Yuna Subject A. He described the armor, the incident at the festival, the classified material signatures. He quoted the phrase veteran of the Silent Front and Aegis program. He connected it to fringe science papers about extrasolar incursion events that had mysteriously ceased 3 years prior. He presented it as a series of compelling questions for the public. He did not send it to a scientific journal. He sent it to an online news site known for sensational tech and conspiracy stories. He used a fake name. He clicked send. The explosion was immediate. The story was a perfect mix of mystery, military secret, and campus legend. It went viral in hours. By the next morning, satellite news trucks were parked outside the university gates. Reporters with cameras swarmed the plaza, stopping students. Have you seen the armored girl? What do you know about the silent front? The campus became a fortress of noise and chaos. University officials, pale and angry, made statements about student privacy and unfounded rumors. It did nothing. The story was out. Yuna saw it on a screen in a common room. She stood frozen as a loud news anchor discussed the possibility of a clandestine, off-world conflict and a living weapon walking among our students. Her face, a still image from someone's phone, was on every screen. The crack on her armor was circled in red. Her world, the quiet, normal life she had fought a war to earn, shattered in an instant. She retreated to her dorm room, but it was no longer a sanctuary. She could hear shouts from outside. She saw camera flashes against her window. The walls felt thin. Professor Kwan found her there. He did not look angry anymore. He looked resigned. With him was a woman the campus knew as Dr. Anya Petrova, a visiting Russian astrophysicist. Dr. Petrova's usual warm smile was gone. Miss Park, Dr. Petrova said, her accent sharp, the situation has escalated. My real employer is the United Nations Extraterrestrial Security Directorate. We must extract you. Now, we can give you a new identity, a new place. Yuna stared at the floor. No, this is not a request, Kwan said, but his voice was tired. Yes, it is, Yuna said, looking up. Her eyes were red, but dry. I completed my mission. I am discharged. I am a citizen. You do not own me. Before they could argue, a university administrator arrived, breathless. They're demanding a statement. The press, the government, everyone. They say if we don't provide confirmation, they'll assume the worst is true. Dr. Petrova exchanged a look with Professor Kwan. A silent decision passed between them. If the truth was coming out, it had to come from them, not from rumors. An hour later, a sudden university-wide alert went out. All classes were canceled. A press conference would be held in the main auditorium. The room was packed, buzzing with noise. Taehyun and Jihoon watched from the back, Taehyun feeling a mix of triumph and creeping dread. Yoonji pushed her way to the front, her face tight with worry. The university president stepped to the microphone, but he was quickly joined by Professor Kwan and Dr. Petrova. Petrova took the microphone. What I am about to tell you is classified, she began, her voice silencing the room. 3 years ago, a series of hyperdimensional anomalies were detected at the heliopause, the edge of our solar system. They were incursions, hostile. A task force was formed. It was called the Silent Front because not a whisper of it could reach the public, for fear of global panic. She took a deep breath. The Aegis program was our final shield. Human volunteers, grafted with experimental systems, were deployed as living barricades against a force we did not fully understand. They were not soldiers in a traditional sense. They were sacrifices. The room was utterly silent. Of the 300 volunteers, Dr. Petrova continued, her voice catching, 299 gave their lives. They held the line until the incursions ceased. One survived. That survivor, following the terms of her discharge, sought a peaceful life. She is here. Her name is Park Yuna. A gasp swept through the auditorium. Cameras flashed. The incident at the festival was not a display of power, Petrova said, her voice growing stronger. It was the instinct of a protector. The armor you see is not a costume. It is the external manifestation of a bio-integrated system that saved this planet. She is not a weapon to be gawked at. She is a veteran who has paid a price none of you can imagine, for a war you never had to fight. She put the microphone down. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The sensational story was gone. In its place was a sober, staggering truth. Taehyun, in the back row, finally understood the weight of what he had done. He had not exposed a secret. He had exposed a person. He had ripped open her scars for the world to see. He looked at his hands, feeling sick. He saw Yoonji turn from the front, her eyes searching the crowd until they found him. Her expression was not angry. It was deeply disappointed. It was worse. The secret was out. But the shock that now filled the room was not about aliens or technology. It was the dawning, humbling realization of a debt owed. A debt to a quiet young woman who had shouldered the unthinkable, and who had only asked to be left alone. The quiet after the press conference was different. The shouting and the camera flashes stopped. The news trucks slowly left. But the attention did not go away. It changed. Now, people looked at Yuna with a hushed, heavy awe. It was a weight almost as bad as the mockery. She could feel their eyes on her, full of questions and a gratitude so big it felt like pity. The university offered her a private security detail. She refused. They offered her remote learning. She refused that too. Dr. Petrova and Professor Kwan presented her with papers for a new identity, a quiet life somewhere far away. "It is the safest path," Dr. Petrova said gently in Kwan's office. Yuna looked at the papers, then out the window at the campus. Students walked below, carrying books, talking about ordinary things. "Safety was never the point," she said. "I had safety. It was empty. This was the point." She pushed the papers back. "I am not leaving." She knew, however, she could not just go back to how things were. The invisible wall around her was now made of crystal, and everyone could see it. She had to do something. She had to speak not to the world, but to the people she lived among. She did not call for a grand assembly. Instead, on a cool, clear afternoon, she walked to the central courtyard, the same place where the festival had been held. She simply stood there, near the repaired stone where her feet had cracked the pavement. Slowly, a crowd gathered. Word spread. Students, professors, and staff came. They formed a wide, silent circle around her. Kim Taehyun and Lee Ji-hoon stood at the edge, and Choi Yoonji stood closer, her hands clasped tightly. Yuna did not use a microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear, carrying in the quiet space. "You know the truth now," she began. "Dr. Petrova told you about the Silent Front, about the Aegis program, about the war." She paused, looking at the faces around her. They were young faces, her own age. "But a report is not a person. I am not a weapon to be displayed. I am not a hero to be worshipped. I am a student." She took a breath, a soft sound that hissed slightly through her armor systems. "What I carry, this armor, it is not for show. It is my scars. It is the memorial for 299 friends who are gone. When you look at me, you see a secret. But the secret is just pain and duty. It is finished. The duty is done." Her voice grew firmer. "I did not come here to be a symbol. I came here to learn, to be normal. That is all I have ever wanted since I came back. To sit in a lecture hall, to worry about grades, to be quiet." She looked directly at Taehyun then, and he flinched. "My life is not a puzzle for you to solve. It is a life for me to live. Please, let me carry this weight in peace. That is all I ask." She stopped talking. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind in the trees. Then, someone in the crowd began to clap. It was not loud or cheering. It was slow, respectful. Others joined. It was not applause for a performance. It was an acknowledgement, a promise. The crowd slowly drifted away, leaving Yuna alone in the courtyard. But the feeling in the air had shifted. The awe was still there, but it was now mixed with a deep, simple respect. Taehyun approached her later that day. He found her sitting on a bench near the pond. He stood before her, his head bowed. "Park Yuna," he said, his voice thick. "What I did, it was wrong. I was curious. I thought I was revealing a truth. But I was invading a life. I am sorry. More sorry than I can say." Yuna looked at him for a long time. She saw no lies in his face, only shame and understanding. "You wanted to know about the war," she said finally. "But wars are not for the people who hear about them. They are for the people who survive them. Your curiosity is not a crime. Your lack of care was. Remember the difference." He nodded, unable to speak further. He turned and left, carrying her words with him, a heavier lesson than any he had learned in class. Life, slowly, began to find a new rhythm. Students no longer stared in quite the same way. They would nod to her in the hallways, a small, respectful gesture. Sometimes, a brave person would sit next to her in the library and simply say, "Thank you," before going back to their work. It was enough. One afternoon, a week later, Yuna walked into her geology lecture. The professor was already there. The room went quiet for a second as she entered. Then the soft murmur of conversation resumed. She took her usual seat in the back. Professor Kwan was the lecturer that day, giving a guest talk on the mineralogy of extraterrestrial bodies. He saw her, gave the faintest of nods, and began his lecture. As he spoke about crystalline structures found on lunar asteroids, Yuna opened her notebook. Her gloved hand picked up a pen. She began to take notes, her writing neat and precise. The faint, ever-present hum of her systems was a soft background noise, like a distant engine. Outside the window, the sun shone on the autumn leaves. A group of students passed by, laughing about something that had nothing to do with wars or secrets or sacrifices. They were just living. Yuna paused in her writing. She looked out at that ordinary scene, at the simple, peaceful world. A world that was whole. A world that was safe. A small, real smile touched her lips. It was a quiet smile, full of sadness and a hard-won peace. She looked down at her notes, at the diagram of a crystal formation. She added a careful label. She was not a weapon. She was not a symbol. She was a student. And for now, in this quiet room, listening to a lecture about rocks from space, that was finally enough. The war was over. Her duty was done. Now she could just be.